On today's episode of Dance Med Spotlight, I'm speaking with Maria Haralambis. She is a PhD candidate, professor, social media manager, pre-pro ballet teacher, and what you probably know her best as, the dance scientist. In today's conversation, we talk a lot to the dance educators, also dancers and dance parents, talking about things like how do we incorporate some of the dance science concepts, whether it's around flexibility, strength training, cardio, anatomy, so many different things that we can bring in, but making it feel manageable, approachable, acknowledging that dance educators wear a million hats and do all the things. They don't have a lot of time and aren't looking to spend a ton of money to learn and incorporate these things either. So we talk about some different ways to accomplish those goals. To the dance parents, we also talk a lot about how we can support your dancers. All of that and more, so make sure to check out the full episode. Welcome back to another episode of Dance Med Spotlight, where we talk about all things dance medicine and dance science. Today, I'm excited for my guest, Maria Haralambis.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to have this nerd conversation.
Yes, we were talking about that before we hit record. Definitely Dance Nerd Talks. Yep. Maybe that should have been the name. Yep. So my first question for everybody is, what got you to this point of working with dancers as part of your career?
Mm-hmm. So this is kind of how I explain, my childhood as a dancer. I was very curious. I was always asking my teacher questions, but they weren't necessarily about technique. Like I had a lot of natural ballet technique as a young dancer, but a lot of my questions were actually more anatomy focused, right? So when I would hold my arms in front of me, I would ask, why do I feel a little bit thin here in my elbow? Or how can I improve how I'm holding my shoulders? Or, when my leg was in développé to the front, I would ask, I can get my right leg up, but I can't hold it. I can do my splits, but I can't hold my leg up, right? Yeah. So my brain was already curious at a very, very young age, but dance medicine really wasn't really a thing back then. I can't really fault the teachers that I had, right? I had a great upbringing and they would look into articles and bring different things to me as much as they could. But again, the curiosity, I followed the curiosity because I'm I really want to answer these questions for myself. And so, I decided to get an undergrad in dance and then continued with my master's in kinesiology because I'm a nerd when it comes to dance science stuff. Yep. And then when I took my first Pilates class in undergrad and my first dance kinesiology class at undergrad, that's when all of the light bulbs went off and finally things started to get answered, right? Mm-hmm. Even if I couldn't answer every single thing about my body, I at least had a toolbox in front of me, right? I was oh, this exists. There's things that I can do to improve this, right? If I would have known about this when I was 11 or 10, think about how much better my dancing would have been, right? Yeah. But now I'm kind of playing catch up, just learning it in undergrad. So that's one of the big things that I'm trying to push now with social media is it should be part of young dancers training, right? Mm-hmm. There's fun ways that we can be teaching things so that they know before they're 14 or before they get to whatever they want to do with dance. So that's kind of what has led me here into this purpose is now I really want to help teachers improve the way that they teach, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And it's so true. I mean, I remember when I was growing up dancing, I had one ballet teacher for a couple of years who did refer to a little bit of anatomy. Mm-hmm. And I honestly think that that's part of the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing now. I found it really interesting. I always enjoyed sciences and things like that anyways. And then later, as I was getting into other schooling, it was oh yeah, I remember Miss Robin talking about, feeling the sartorius muscle in our thigh and that kind of thing. And it was oh, this is kind of cool. And then I was thinking about PT school and became a PT, and it just was this evolution of different things. But I think that was what really kind of sparked an interest of there's more going on than just somehow I'm moving my body and it's ending up at a place. So it is really powerful knowledge to have for sure.
And, in that moment, it's obviously was a lot of happy feelings for me to be learning more about my body. Like when I took my first dance kinesiology class in undergrad, but then again, it's like half of me is like a little bit frustrated. Then it's like I'm now playing catch up at a time when the body is harder to catch up, right?
Right.
And if I would have been learning about this, embedded it into dancers education, think of how my training would have improved, right? Or at least I
Mhm.
would have understood, okay, let me work on this so that I can improve my front développé, right? So that
Yes.
that I'm able to hold my leg up, but I can do the splits, right? How does that make sense, right? I was
Mhm.
flexible, but I didn't have the strength.
Exactly. Yeah, there are things now that I've been able to even apply to myself as an adult dancer where I think there's certain things that I have better movement and control in now than I ever did as a kid because I didn't know where it was coming from or what to work on or whatever.
And it's up to the teachers, young
Mhm.
dancers, it's young, like obviously young brains have those like, short span thinking. They can't necessarily think long term, right?
Yeah.
Like when they see those quick fixes on social media, like, oh, get your splits in, a week by doing all these crazy stretches, they're like, oh, that sounds great, right? But they don't think about the long term.
Right, exactly. And there is a lot of social media influence on those things, whether it's seeing some new gizmo or gadget. I don't know if you've seen the newest one, at least newest to me. I saw it on TikTok recently. It's to help with your center splits, and you sit in it and you literally crank it and it just moves you further out to the side. And seeing that, I just immediately was cringing as, "Oh, no, am I gonna start having dancers come in with this now of, look at
It's,
this new toy that I have to try to work on my flexibility."
I mean, I feel like every day there's 50 new things on social media trying to get sold to young dancers,
Mhm.
right? And it's like we really have to watch out with like the messaging that we're doing because we have to watch like what certifications do these people have is my first question. Like,
Yes.
are they knowledgeable enough to be giving out that sort of information? Obviously, dancers don't really look at stuff like that, but like obviously we can consider stuff like that. I always check out
Mhm.
people's, like, do they have a website? Even if they don't, maybe they at least list some credentials in their Instagram bio so that at least I'm like, okay, they're coming from a little bit of knowledge, but
Mhm.
still sometimes it's just like seeing these accounts with like 100K followers, and I'm like, it's just frustrating.
Definitely. Well, and that's one of the things that I love, like, with the content that you're putting out. Not only is it good information and, you have here are the references where some of this stuff came from, and you can go back and look more into it if you want to, but it's also presented in really nice bite-sized pieces that is approachable to a variety of people reading it. It's not just written to other science-y folks out there and that kind of stuff. And so it's a nice way to sort of balance some of the other things that we sometimes see on social media. So I love your content all the time.
Thank you, because I'm trying to make it fun too. There's fun ways like with imagery and stuff that we can use. You don't just have to sit there and read an article, a 20
Yeah.
page article,
Yeah.
you can just pull out the important nuggets for people.
Mhm. Well, and that's what makes it easier to, be able to kind of process what you're reading. What does this mean? What can I do with this? You often do give some suggestions of like, here's a way that you can incorporate this.
You know,
And again, it's not a novel that somebody has to go through in order to make sense of that information.
because I think teachers have the assumption, when they hear like, oh, that, like, in my opinion, I think like continued professional development is important. And
Mhm.
a thing that I try to put out on my content is like there's actually a lot of affordable options. Like you don't have to spend an arm and a leg. You don't have to get a certification, because teachers already wear a lot of hats, right? Like they're juggling a lot of things. Maybe some of them teach almost all the classes at their studio, right?
Mhm.
So they're already wearing a lot of hats. And so I just really want to communicate as much as I can that there are affordable options out there. Sometimes you just have to dig for them. And like, obviously, you have to make sure that they're of a certain quality, in my opinion. But there's ways to continue your professional development without spending $1 million. Like,
Mhm. And there's some really great organizations that help with getting that information out too, and ones that I know that you've been involved in a lot, like with NDEO or IADMS,
Yep.
places where dance educators can go and find a lot of information and a lot of other folks like them that maybe want to learn together as well.
Yeah, like, I mean, even on Harkness, I've taken classes for like, I've taken like hour-long lectures for $20,
Mhm.
20, $25. I mean, you really can't beat it for the quality of education that you're getting.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
there's at that point, it's like no excuses really.
Mhm.
At least doing something to continue to learn yourself, better and evolve the way that you teach.
Mhm. Thinking about a lot of the information that we have an opportunity to learn and share and that sort of thing. What is maybe, let's start with one top item that you're like, oh, I wish all dance teachers
Mm,
knew this
mm,
for their dancers or for themselves.
mm. Overstretching. Right, like the
Yes.
topic of like dynamic warm-ups, right? This is a big
Mhm.
one because again, it's like dancers see the things on social media. I mean, obviously as a PT, they want those quick fixes. They want to get those splits. And then they see, oh, maybe there's like a professional dancer that they see on Instagram too. Like that can be very influential for them. They're like, oh, I'll just do
Mhm.
what the professional dancer is doing because if the professional dancer is dancing currently, then if I do that, my chances of dancing will increase, right? Like that's how their
Mhm.
brains think. And so again, it's like it's the responsibility of the teachers, right, to be teaching appropriate information, right? Like there's ways to
Mhm.
improve flexibility in safe ways, right? Like
Yes.
no one is saying to not stretch, but in the dance world, it's obviously overdone in my opinion. There needs to be more strength involved. So that again, like
Mhm.
for me as a young dancer, like I could get my ba all the way up to my nose, but I couldn't hold my leg there. So it's like, why? It goes back to a lack of strength. I
Mhm.
know. So that's a big
Yeah.
with dynamic warm-ups too. That can kind of be lumped in with it too. Yes.
Mhm.
Walk into class and just drop into your splits.
Right.
The old school.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and I think, to your point of thinking about flexibility, it's it's really easy for someone to focus on the stretching part because it's like, if you stretch, you get more flexible. Cool. But it's all about the control of it. If
Right.
we don't do something to strengthen, how often in our dance do we just sit in a position or stand there? Like, even if there's a pose in a dance where someone is standing there holding their leg up here, it's not like you're spending in the entire dance doing that. Eventually, you have to move that leg again. And so having strength to support moving in and out of those movements to be able to hold that position for at least a few seconds without needing a hand or something to help you be there is the other missing piece of the puzzle.
I think like one of the things with strength training that dancers see is they think they're going to get bulky or they think it's going to like decrease their flexibility, right? When like literally the
Mhm.
opposite is true.
Yeah.
It will actually help the other thing.
Yeah. One thing to get bulky, especially real bulky, you have to try to do that. Like,
Heavy there for a female. I mean, it's just like it's not
yeah,
such a high volume. It's not that realistic.
yeah, and, lots of diet modifications to support it, and I mean, it needs to be a plan to achieve that. You're not going to accidentally one day wake up and have
Oh,
giant biceps.
yeah. And be like, where did these biceps come from?
Exactly.
No.
Yeah. Well, and I think, with the idea of strengthening limits flexibility, a big part of it also is how you do the strengthening. So, if you're only ever strengthening in a really small range of motion, that's going to have a different effect than trying to strengthen through an entire range of motion of something. So, there are ways where we can get into almost a more kind of flexible position that also is strengthening while we're working on it. So, it's kind of a 2-for-1 exercise, which I'm always a fan of.
I think, obviously we know that dancers just they love to stretch. They'll stretch all day long, but then strengthening, it's like, oh, I have to do this.
Mhm.
it's just like we're honoring what one thing I try to say is like I know that we're teaching with traditions, right? And like I try to like honor the traditions that we started with, right? Because dance is kind of passed down from teacher to teacher a lot of the times, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of their traditions, like in my opinion, they need to be improved, right? But
Mhm.
it's not coming from a place of like disrespecting the traditions.
Yeah.
I'm actually just trying to like improve them using does that make am I kind of
Mhm.
what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
not disrespecting where the art form came from. Like we're just dance science is just trying to literally just improve the dance world, right?
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
that's hard to explain to people sometimes.
Yeah. And I think a big part of it, I mean, the biggest part to me is if there are ways that some of these principles can be incorporated, and it's not that we're saying that everything needs to change or everything needs to be incorporated. It can
No,
be some, fairly quick and easy
one tiny thing,
things.
one small
Um, it could make a difference in what a dance career is for a dancer. Maybe they peter out in at the end of high school or as they're getting into college because their body's just like, I'm done. But if we can help them be safer, move more efficiently, create space for them to let their artistry shine in their dance,
Mhm.
the longevity of what that dance career could be for that dancer is limitless. It's when they decide that they're done with it, not because their body says, "Sorry, can't do this anymore."
And like, the change thing that you brought up, that's another thing that I talk about a lot is like it does not have to be like large sweeping change. Like, like I understand that like certain cultures at certain studios or certain directors, it's different sometimes. Sometimes you have to teeter around and some people just are very resistant to any sort of change. And so sometimes
Mhm.
you really do just have to do like one tiny, tiny thing at a time, right? And so
Yeah.
like you can kind of take like nuggets from what we're talking about today. And maybe there's like one way that you can apply it in your scenario, right? In
Mhm.
your culture, because like I said, certain cultures are different than others. Certain cultures are a little bit more like, oh, we want to try this, but certain other ones are kind of like, we're just gonna stick with what we've been taught since we were 40 years ago. So
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
understand that cultures are different and yeah,
Yeah.
there's that.
And and I think there's so much to that tradition piece because and this was something that I was talking with another guest about a few months back where so often, especially some of the smaller studios and that sort of thing, a lot of times some of the dancers who graduate from there come back and become teachers.
Mhm.
And it's, they kind of like keep it in the family, which is a lovely tradition as well.
Mhm.
But sometimes it's also a chance to sort of miss out of learning from somebody else who comes in, or if you had done some training someplace else
Mhm.
or that kind of thing. And so needing to spend some time to go out and get some of that other information and continue learning, like you've mentioned, I think is really important.
And again, like I'll speak to the fact again, teachers wear a lot of hats and are very
Yes.
busy, right? Like
Yes.
they're already have a million things to do. A lot of them choreograph, some of them maybe own their own studios, right? So like
Mhm.
no one is saying to you need to sit there and read a 40-page article, or no one is saying you need to sit there and spend all of this money to improve how you teach, right? There's
Yes.
actually ways that you can do it without spending any money, right? There's
Mhm.
just little things that you can do in your own teaching. Because
Yeah.
just because you were taught a certain way for your plies 30 years ago, it doesn't mean that that's the way you have to teach it now.
Mhm.
That's it.
Mhm. What's one thing that you have seen make a big impact when it gets incorporated for dancers?
Just basic anatomy.
Mhm.
I mean, like, just literally, like, but I teach it in a way that I hope I teach it in a way that's fun for the kids, right? Not just obviously not just a sit down lecture. Like, it's wrapped into what I teach because I mostly teach ballet classes.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I have a really fun time, exploring fun imagery with them. And like they're learning anatomy without even really realizing that they're learning anatomy, if that makes sense, because it's
Mhm.
kind of like wrapped into the class. So yeah, I love blending it into the classes that I teach. Again,
Mhm.
like, I kind of explore like different options on my Instagram sometimes. Like I call it like the sprinkle technique where you kind of like blend it into your class, or you can set apart like, if you have 5 minutes, if you have like a little stretch class that you do with your dancers, maybe you do a little 5 minute anatomy lesson at the beginning or at the end.
Mhm.
Again, there's little ways that you can sneak stuff in there and they don't feel like they're sitting down and having a anatomy lecture because they're not, but
Yeah.
it's wrapped into what you're teaching them, right? The
Yeah.
quality of teaching is, I mean, my quality of teaching is completely different from all of my anatomy training.
Mhm. I
Right.
feel like anatomy is such an important piece, and as a physical therapist, it's something that I teach every patient that walks in my door, whether it has been a dancer or when I've worked with a lot of folks in the past, and it's just, whether there is some sort of ache or pain going on, you're trying to figure out how to do an exercise, you're trying to change a movement pattern, being able to have that visual or that knowledge of where it is or how it works or that kind of thing, it makes it easier to access that stuff too, and not just have this elusive, like, I don't know, you told me to move my arm
Yeah,
somehow.
what is she talking about? Yeah, because like think about this, like there's levels with stuff like this too. So we're not saying that we're teaching these people like the deepest physiology of their humerus, right? Like that's
Mhm.
not what we're teaching. We're teaching like most of the time I'm teaching my young kids like just very basic stuff. Even with my pre-pose, I'm blending anatomy, but again, in a way that's digestible and it's blending into the class, so it's not taking up class time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what we've talked about a few resources like NDEO, IADMS, Harkness, of course, content that you're putting out as well. What might be some other sources that you find are really beneficial for dance educators to access?
So first, I also recommend like them just joining an organization. Like
Mhm.
I really do recommend that right off the bat because that's another way that I really like I met people like us, like-minded people, but like you also like you literally like learn more as a member of an organization because then you get to attend conferences, right? So you
Mhm.
can join IADMS, you can join NDEO is also just another really good one. And they also have a few anatomy things that you can do at their conferences too. But I
Mhm.
really, really want to communicate that there are affordable ones out there, but sometimes you do have to dig. And for dance teachers, like I said, I do recommend joining an organization. And like, it's a great way to also just meet friends and stuff like that too. But
Mhm.
yeah,
100%.
yes.
One of the things that just came back into my brain from something we were talking about earlier too, and it segues from what we were just talking about as far as resources for dance educators. We were talking about the tradition in dance and how it gets passed down through studios and folks who get trained. I feel like that's also an opportunity for some of this information to join some of that tradition. And, I have studio owners or dance educators that have been clients of mine in the PT clinic who have learned something from me because we're working on, their knee hurts, their ankle hurts, who knows what we're working on. And they go, "Oh yeah, I incorporated this idea in my class with my students." Or it could be something not even incorporating it in class, but just having the knowledge to go, I had a student also come up and talk to me, and it sounds like they maybe have something similar going on. And I said, maybe they should come see you or come see somebody to get it checked out, rather than maybe previously they would have said, well, try working through it, or who knows what other advice they might have given. And so just having the experience themselves of working with somebody or learning from somebody, they can pass that knowledge down to the dancers that they're working with.
I mean, yeah, that kind of reminds me too. In my NDO course, one of the first things that I do in like module one with all of my students is I ask them like, what is your anatomy background? Because everyone really comes from, I mean, you probably wouldn't be surprised, but it's really like surprising to really think about like, we all come from kind of like a different level of anatomy training, right? Like I had a
Mhm.
little bit in my training, and then obviously it increased in my undergrad and my master's, but like you would kind of be surprised, like a lot of these teachers really didn't have like a strong foundation at any point. And so, this is kind of, like my course is one example, but like anytime that they are continuing their education in anatomy, you're kind of like catching up with things that, I learned in my undergrad and like you have also learned for PT school, but it's just kind of interesting to see like we kind of come from different backgrounds with anatomy and dance science, right? Like, some places are more rural. They don't have access to, they don't really know what dance science is. Maybe they only have one dance PT in that whole state, and so, yeah, there's different areas to think about too. And I just think it's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And where all of the technology and social media and everything comes in so handy now to
Yeah.
be able to get some easier access to some things.
Yeah. And that's why for me, I like Instagram. For me, Instagram is like a fun community of people like us because like
Mhm.
I make sure, obviously it's easier for me at my age to make sure that I'm not following anyone that's like, like if I see oversplits or if I see stuff that I just don't agree with, I'll just like simply give them an unfollow, right?
Mhm.
Easy for us as adults, but for dancers, I can see like growing up in this environment where they're just seeing the next trend on TikTok. They're just seeing like, oh, buy this foot stretcher. I would do the foot stretchers at home when I was
Mhm.
young because that's
Mhm.
that's it was a
It was
trend,
the thing. Yeah.
right? It was the trend. You follow the trend to improve your foot, right? And now I'm like,
Mhm.
well, let's not do that.
Mhm.
Let's not.
Yeah, so thinking of that, like some of those different, I don't know,
Gadget.
tools, equipment, whatever you wanna call it, that they have for stretching. There's the foot stretcher, there's the thing I was talking about earlier, different, like, straps, and I don't know what all the gizmos and gadgets. But a lot of them, in concept, they do help stretching things. However,
Of course.
it is set up exactly the same for every individual that is out there,
Mhm.
whether or not that is the place that they need support or the way that they need to move, or there's like nothing individualized by it.
Mhm.
And so, sure, there might be some dancers where like it's a great alignment and just the right things in the right places. But for the majority of dancers, it is not supporting them in the way that they are hoping and maybe forcing areas that shouldn't be forced.
Mhm.
So getting guidance and some customization of things is
Mhm.
also really important.
Yep, and that's a great piece of information too, because like I said, like I mean, you just like you see the short-term benefits as a dancer, right? Like maybe in a month your arch improves. Like honestly, maybe sometimes the arches improve, but then like think long term. Like we know long term that it's not a good thing to do, right? Or
Yeah.
sitting in your splits. I would just sit in my center splits for
Oh, yeah.
like 8 minutes at a time because I needed to get I had my right and my left splits, but I always had an issue with my center split. So I'm like, okay, I'll just hold it at home so I can improve. Like that
Mhm.
was the way of thinking back then. And
Mhm.
now, like now I would never have
Yeah.
any kids do that ever.
Yeah. Exactly. Or I remember hearing stories back in the day of things like working on center splits up against a wall and the
It's like,
teacher coming up back to back
oh no.
and pushing them into the wall. And I'm shocked that there weren't more people with all kinds of injuries popping up right and left doing all of that.
It's the stretching is a hard thing. It's
Mhm.
because it's finding the balance, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Between the right amount for each dancer. And
Mhm.
dancers are already so stretchy and limb and loose and yeah, most of the time they need the strength and the control behind it.
Mhm. And thinking of the strength piece too, it's a really important element to have for dancers who are doing any sort of partner work,
Mhm.
whether it is doing things like pas de deux in ballet, or if there are lifts or things, in modern classes where sometimes you're like hanging or hinging or lots of shapes and things happen in modern class or in contemporary. And so any of those times where you are connected to another human and relying on them as part of the movement that you're doing, having good strength is important for yourself, for your own safety, but then also for the safety of the person or people that you are connected to through
Mhm.
those movements too.
And I think like for me, one of the articles that I read in it really stood out to me. Like if you really think like, just like an average ballet class, like the strength component, it's not just in like, obviously, this, and I'm kind of speaking to just like basically our little people here, but
Yeah.
you really think about the strength, it's not just in like the power movements, like in their leaps and in their grand jetés and their sissons and in their allegro. It actually is in like the adage work too, like in the plies, everything, just being able to hold the leg, right? Like it's like behind every single step in a traditional ballet class, right? And it layers into other dance styles too. But if you really think about it that way, it's not just to get a higher leap. It's actually also going to help you hold your leg up in your adage. So
Definitely. Another one that I think doesn't get talked about as much, we've been talking about flexibility and strength, is cardio work. We, as dancers, we work hard. There's no doubt that we work hard. We get our heart rates up. We get all sweaty doing the stuff, all that. But looking at sustained heart rate at a high enough level to really get some of the cardio benefits,
not enough.
it doesn't add up as much as we feel like it does in class.
Yep. And the cardio thing is hard too because fatigue becomes a thing, right? When dancers are over, like their teachers are having them, run this rehearsal over and over again. And then obviously when the fatigue sets in and like neuromuscular things can't work properly when the fatigue sets in, right? Yes. And so that's another big, and periodization, right? Tapering. Like tapering is a thing that athletes do, but dancers, it's like when they have a competition coming up, they rehearse more.
Yep.
A lot of them, I mean, like they're just, let's just run this dance more so we can work on cleaning it, right?
Yeah.
Athletes, they taper right before big things.
Exactly. Yeah, I think some of the like college football teams actually have rules where they can't have big practices the day of a big game or, things like that we don't do that.
No.
In fact, let's do 2 shows in a day.
Yeah, for us, the day of the shows, it was like in college, it was like, we just took our normal technique classes that day. Like they would give us hard classes sometimes, and then we would kind of be tired, and then we would go straight to the theater. And it's like, looking at it now, it's like, does it really make sense? Like, we're trying, like, in what other ways could we be helping dancers training and wellness on that day without giving them a full technique class? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's other things that we can be doing. Like in a lot of the articles I read about cardio health for dancers, they talk about like you can like work on like videoing performances so that dancers are watching the performance but not having to do it 500 times in a row, or they could do it in groups so that they get a little bit of a break. Like there's little things that can be done here and there so that like you're still giving them a quality teaching. Like it's not like you're just, I feel like I'm teaching the kids nothing. Well, you're not, because that's not true, because you're just incorporating science in a way that's healthier for them, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the idea of videoing it or, going through imagery activities and that sort of thing, there's so much science that supports imagery as a legitimate form of practice and improving what is going to be the performance later.
And I think it's hard with teachers sometimes, because sometimes we can be in a studio culture where it's like, well, I want you to be running those dances. Like, I want this dance to improve. Right. But again, like if you really think like there's other things that we can be doing with the kids so that you're still using the class and like you're still getting a good quality class, just in a different way. Instead of running the dance 35 times, you don't need to run. Is it really going to improve? Are the dancers really improving at that point, or are they just past the point of fatigue? They're probably past the point of fatigue. And that's when the technique starts to just decrease anyway. So it's like, what is the point at that point?
Yeah. I remember seeing a quote just in the last few days that was at the top of a chapter of Monica Seigel's book, Nourishing Dancers.
Okay.
And it was a quote from Stephen McCrae, who had said, essentially, when he had, I think it was his big, more recent injury, he had found that he was fatigued. He had not been fueling well during that day. There were multiple things that were sort of not in his favor. as that day started, and then that's when he had his big injury. And so, I think it's an important thing to think about, of like, what impact is fatigue or underfueling or whatever having, and hearing it from somebody as famous as Stephen McRae is helpful, I think. But keeping that in mind of running a dance 35 times, or can we incorporate some of these other things, still being purposeful with our time, and keep the dancers maybe a bit safer in the process?
Yeah. There's, like I said, there's easy ways to do it. But again, it's like, I understand both sides of the token sometimes, because as a teacher, I can understand if sometimes you're in a studio culture where it's like, oh, like we were kind of saying before, like, I want you to be running the dance, through the whole class, right? Like, I need this part to improve. Like, they're really having a hard time with this part, right? Like, teachers can kind of feel that pressure and be like, well, what am I going to do at this point? If those were kind of my directions, it's like, what am I to do at this point?
Yeah. I'm taking an adult tap class right now, and we are performing in the recital in May,
Gosh.
which I'm super excited about.
Nice.
And we had a sub last night because our main teacher's out. And I really love the way that she had us running through our dance, because we have a pretty high energy, high tempo dance and all of that sort of thing. So running it 35 times would be a little exhausting. And the room was kind of warm last night and all of that. And so her approach was, okay, we're still going to run the dance, but it seems like you guys are remembering a lot of the choreography. Can we clean up transitions? And so we went and we looked at transition times, and where it was like, okay, this segment, we're going to work on this. And like, what are the steps we're wanting? What is the timing of those steps? Let's just practice that. Okay, now let's string it together with what was before and after that. So, I mean, we ran the whole dance maybe like 4 times during our class, but with those pieces that we were doing, it was so much cleaner by the end of it. And we were not ready to like pass out between the heat and running it a million times. And I so appreciated that.
That's what I'm saying, is like, there are so many different things that you can be doing when when dancers are leading up to competition. So that, again, like, she did it in a way so that you guys were still getting quality class, right? You weren't just sitting around hanging out for the whole hour, right? Like, you were getting quality teaching still, like, in my opinion, probably even more because you felt like the dance was a little bit cleaner, right? Again, it's like, she focused on just that section where it's like, where I was saying before, what is the point of running the whole dance 35 times in a row when really it's like, I think they really need help in that one section. Boom. That is such a perfect example of what we're talking about today, is like, easy, boom.
Yeah.
Sweating. Easy.
Exactly.
Very, very simple.
Yeah. And, there is certainly that upfront time and effort to like find ideas, figure out how to incorporate it for your class, for your studio. Maybe it's different for one class than a different one. But once you kind of get the rhythm of it, you find out what works and that sort of thing, it also gets easier to incorporate those things.
Right.
So I feel like sometimes that's where some of the barrier can feel like it presents, where it's like, oh, this seems like a lot. But with some time and just, working through it a little bit, you can figure out some cool little things.
Right. And like, you can just kind of look at dancers' schedule, like their yearly schedule before the year starts. You can kind of see when their competitions are, and you can start thinking like, okay, maybe instead of running every dance the day before or the week before, maybe we can incorporate little easy, simple things like this, right? So that they're still getting quality of teaching. But this would, obviously, I don't really see this happening like across the board. This would be something that would be, but I think it's just like a way that you can honor dancers' health and honor where dancers are right now at this time, mentally and physically. And it's like, is running the dance 30 times going to help them improve the part that you want them to improve, or no? And I think that's a question you need to ask. Yeah.
Well, and even looking at how our brains process information, how we learn movement or change movement, going to concepts from things like motor control, motor learning, ideas of part practice versus whole practice. So like what we were doing in class last night, where we broke it down to pieces and then we put them back together. Or, working on different sequencing or facing different directions or things like that, just kind of changing one element of what it is that you're practicing. As dancers are practicing in that way and starting to integrate things together, sometimes it helps their memory as well, or helps them figure out how to piece things together, how to coordinate these things, because you're challenging them in different ways and to think about it in different ways, rather than it being almost like, a cookie cutter
Yeah.
repetition every time as well.
Right. There's like that better transfer to the dance classroom. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like they're probably already at that overload. And so we really have to be thinking of like there's creative ways that we can still be getting a good quality class out of them in different ways, right? In fun, unique, creative ways.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. Like we said at the beginning, this is the dance nerd conversation for sure. I love it.
Nerds and
nerds. What is maybe... so let's take a little different twist on this. So we've talked a lot about sort of the dance educator's perspective on this and things that they can do in class.
Yeah.
What's maybe a piece of advice or a recommendation that you have maybe for dance parents to support their dancers?
Okay. So dance parents, I really recommend having like a balanced approach with your dancers, right? Not getting so overly involved and obsessed that you're forcing things onto them, right? Like, oh, I want my kid to be a beautiful ballerina, but in a balanced way, right? Like you're involved and you're supporting them, but it's in a way like where the dancer can still has autonomy and like can make their own decisions. Does that kind of make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like finding that perfect balance. There's that little fine line where they can support their dancers and not overdo it, if that makes sense, especially during adolescence.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I actually just had that conversation with a family recently where they're realizing that, so there's a particular class that they thought would be beneficial for their dancer. It's not one that's required by the studio, but they thought it would be good to just kind of diversify what they're training in. And now they're realizing their dancer doesn't particularly love it. And the dancer says, I don't know that it feels great on my body doing this either. And so while we were talking about things last night, it came up of, well, maybe the thing to do would be to not continue with this class, but she wants to find more time to be able to incorporate strength and conditioning and that kind of thing. So maybe that's the trade-out of not doing the class that she doesn't love anyways and doesn't feel great anyways, for something that she is learning is benefiting her body and that she's building joy in incorporating in what she's doing. And I love that was such just a beautiful conversation between parent and child yesterday during that session, that I'm just kind of sitting back and going, I love this. Yes, I support this entire thing.
And a lot of the times too, like even if the parent wasn't a dancer, like dance now is different. Even if they were a dancer back in the day, like things are different now. And so another piece of advice, like you were kind of just saying with that example, would just to be like to listen to your kids, right? Listen to what they're telling you about their classes and how they're feeling about them, because they're probably being honest with you, right? Like they're obviously they feel comfortable enough to even open up to you about maybe what they're feeling in that class. And so taking that information and then as an adult being able to be like, oh, well then like how you were doing with that example with the strength class, like that's a perfect example, right? Like, okay, maybe we can find a little bit better way to spend that time instead of just forcing this kid to oh, well, I'm just going to make my kid continue the class, but what's the point? Yes. So I think it's finding that balance of support without over involvement, without an over obsession. Yes.
One thing that I find too is, particularly for the dancers, there's so much that is sort of decided for them. The class is laid out what it's going to be.
They don't have
Pieces are choreographed. Yeah, they don't have autonomy in what they are doing in so much of their time. And so parents have a great opportunity, or dance educators have some great opportunities to sometimes give some choices, or like what I do in the clinic with dancers, especially once we've kind of gotten to know each other a little bit, not like first session as we're figuring each other out. I'll have them try a couple of different things that are working on the same goal. And then I'll say, which one of these do you like better? Or which one feels better on your body? And then I let them make the choice of which one they want to do. So I'm still giving some guidance of like, here's the box we're trying to stay in, but you get to choose an item from the box.
And I mean, that's a great thing to even be doing with dancers, right? Like when I train like my pre-pro ballerinas, I'm not just giving them like guidance throughout the whole hour, right? Like I'm being like, how does this feel? How does this right shoulder feel? Maybe we can improve how this feels, right? Like I'm having a dynamic instruction with them so that they also feel like they can bounce ideas off each other with me, if that makes sense. And it's kind of the same thing that you're doing in your PT clinic. Having that open sense of feedback and conversation. So it's not just like, do this exercise, do this.
Yeah. Exactly. I find that so helpful, even as a dancer myself. Like when I take private lessons for the swing dancing that I do, I have had some folks that I take from who say, your arm needs to be like this. Your foot has to step like this. And even if I'm saying, but that doesn't feel comfortable on my body, or I have a history of an injury here and that doesn't feel great. And they still just say, but this is what you need to do, versus the ones that I work with that say, okay, well, let's workshop this and see what we can make happen where it still is achieving some of the aesthetics or some of the, the movement patterns that we're expecting for the dance style, while also honoring what you're feeling in your body.
Right. You're still honoring like the dance style and like keeping as many traditions as possible, but you're also like, you're kind of blending it with your needs at that period of time. Right. And it's also just frustrating to hear that there's still teachers that are just like, well, if you tell them that like that example that you just gave, if they're just like, well, you have to put your arm here. And it's like, well, just like, even as an adult, I think that's like shocking that you still hear that just taking adult classes. It's just that really shouldn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. All right. I think at this point, it's a good opportunity for a special segment on the show. So on every episode of Dance Med Spotlight, we have the final bow, essentially your take-home message. We've talked about a lot of things directed at a lot of different types of audiences. What are maybe one or two things that you hope folks walk away with after listening to this episode?
Yep. So I'll specifically focus on dance educators, that kind of like my favorite little population to focus on. A couple things, like I'll give maybe like 3 little tidbits. First tidbit is you can be blending anatomy into when you teach technique classes, right? You do not have to be taking away an hour technique class. You don't have to set aside time if you don't want to, right? If that doesn't really fit in your studio's culture, you don't have to. You can blend it when you're teaching a développé. How can you improve how you're teaching the développé, right? The second tidbit would be to find affordable ways to continue your professional development. There are things out there. Even the classes on NDEO, in my opinion, are reasonably priced because you're getting quality classes. And you can also, if you add a certain amount of classes up, you can get a certificate in dance education. Yeah. So it's really cool. Yeah. Third tidbit from today. We talked a lot about the third tidbit for today. Since we also said teachers wear so many hats, I really, really, really want them to understand that there's ways to do it. There's ways to learn about anatomy without taking a full course, even if that's not something that they want to do right now. You know what I'm saying? Like, I understand that they're so busy. Most of the time, that's like the first thing that I hear from teachers is, oh, I'm busy. I can't take this extra class on, right? And so it's like, okay, what are some simple ways? Like maybe there's certain Instagrams that you like, maybe there's a certain course that you want to take. Like what is a really simple way that you can improve your own anatomy training?
I love it. Then we also have the shameless plug. So your opportunity to promote anything, anyone, anything that you have going on. The floor is yours.
Yep. So I'll really plug my NDEO class right now. I'm really proud of it. It's open for enrollment. It starts in early July and then it goes right through August. So it's just a quick 8-week course. And yeah, it's considered like a mini course. So again, it's another digestible way that you can be learning about anatomy. And that's exactly what we talk about, is what we talked about today. Ways that you can blend it right into your classes, and then ways that you can actually set aside little lectures, right? And I do it in a way so that like I said, I understand where educators come from. They come with a different amount of anatomy training, right? And so I don't expect every educator to know every single thing about the développé to the front, right? But I just do it in a way where like, okay, maybe what is a simple way that you can do this in your culture right now without disrupting your current situation, if that makes sense.
Yes, fantastic. Well, Maria, thank you so much for your time today. It was great getting to chat and be dance nerds together.
I love this. I mean, we could talk forever.
Right? Exactly.
Literally. Thank you so much for having me.
Dance Med Spotlight is hosted and produced by Alyssa Arms. We discuss all things dance medicine. This has been another episode from Dance Med Spotlight. The Dance Med Spotlight is intended for educational purposes only. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present.